What if I told you that once upon a time, somewhere in the Middle East, there was a country on the verge of becoming a dream? A nation where a single unit of its currency was worth more than $3. Yes, $3 full. This was a country building schools and hospitals faster than any of its neighbors. A nation that launched a campaign to almost eradicate illiteracy. So successful that even the United Nations awarded them for it. This wasn't Switzerland. This was Iraq in the late 1970s. They had oil, they had money, and most importantly, they had a future. So, what the hell happened? How did the dream turn into this nightmare? How do you take one of the richest countries in the world and sink it into unpayable debt while leaving its people starving? Well, turns out there's a recipe. A catastrophic step-by-step guide. This is the complete manual on how to squander the wealth of an entire nation. Let's begin with step 1, owning a treasure beyond measure. In 1980, Iraq was sitting on 30 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. Huge number. But wait, by 1987, they discovered even more. Reserves shot up to 100 billion barrels. They were producing 3.5 million barrels per day. Money was flowing like a river. And with that money, they built everything. Roads, bridges, factories, hospitals. They had a stable, educated middle class. Everything seemed perfect, right? Except there was one small problem. One very big problem. It was all under the control of one man. Every decision was his. And when all your eggs are in one basket, and that basket belongs to a man with other ambitions, well, that's when the fun begins. In September 1980, the regime decided roads and hospitals were boring. What's more exciting? War! War with neighbor Iran! Step 2 in our disaster guide. Start a war you can't easily win. First casualty? Oil. Production collapsed, exports tanked. Suddenly, the cash river turned into a trickle. But don't worry, the regime had a backup plan. Iraq entered the war with $35 billion in reserves, savings for a rainy day. But the war dragged on, 8 long, expensive years. By the end, not only was the vault empty, they were $80 billion in debt, from plus $35 billion to minus $80 billion, a net loss of $115 billion. They burned through their own money, then their neighbors' money too. Between 1981 and 1985, Iraq spent $24 billion on weapons alone, becoming the world's biggest arms customer. Guns before bread, missiles before medicine. And meanwhile, they secretly spent billions on stranger projects. A nuclear program. Chemical weapons used on Iranians and even their own people. And best of all, Project Babylon, a giant gun. Because when your country is bankrupt, it makes perfect sense to build the world's biggest cannon, right? So you're broke and $80 billion in debt. What do? Tighten the belt? Draft an economic plan? Of course not. Step 3 in the disaster manual. When drowning in debt, invade your rich neighbor.
Good evening. It is a prescription for war, this Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, the tiny country that is a primary source of oil for much of the Western world. But tonight, the United States, the Soviet Union, Israel, and other powers are concentrating on diplomatic and economic solutions to this surprising and dangerous development.
The plan was simple. Seize Kuwait's oil to solve debt problems. But the world didn't like that idea. The result was Operation Desert Storm. What was left of Iraq's infrastructure was systematically destroyed. Power plants, bridges, everything. But destruction wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the bill. After the war, the world decided Iraq had to pay damages. How much? $52.4 billion. And the genius method of payment? They took a percentage of every single oil barrel Iraq sold in the future. They mortgaged the country's only source of income for decades, not just bankrupting the present, but guaranteeing the future stayed bankrupt too. And here we reach the most painful chapter, the 1990s. The UN imposed total economic sanctions, no selling, no buying, total isolation. The result? A humanitarian catastrophe. The currency once worth $3 became worthless. Doctors and engineers who built modern Iraq were impoverished.
يعني أبيع حاجة من بيت عادي حتى بحيث أوكل عائلتي أوكل أطفالي كله بسبب الحصار هذا.
Children died for lack of medicine. It was the slow, systematic destruction of an entire generation. Oh, but there was the Oil for Food program. Sounds nice, right? But check the details. Huge chunks of oil money went straight to, yep, you guessed it, Kuwait compensation and UN costs. What remained barely kept famine at bay. Meanwhile, the regime always found ways to smuggle and steal. So while children starved and hospitals had no medicine, what was the regime busy with? Building this, and more than 100 other palaces and luxury villas just like it. Billions poured into these empty monuments, palaces no one lived in, shrines to a ruler while his people died. This wasn't mismanagement. This was a choice, a deliberate choice. Marble over medicine, gold over bread. More than $600 billion. That's the figure we can count, not including the cost of lost lives, wasted generations, or stolen futures. The true legacy isn't the debt or destruction. The true legacy is the question every Iraqi asks: what could we have been? The wealth of the past was squandered, the wealth of the future mortgaged, the present wasted. And this isn't just the story of one country's economy. It's a cautionary tale of how one man's ambitions can cost a nation everything.